I woke up to find my driveway had been stolen. Not in the literal sense, but according to the letter that had been aggressively taped to my front door, the homeowners association had officially declared it community property. I stood there in my robe, coffee in hand, staring at the letter as if maybe, just maybe, it might change if I read it enough times. No luck. The HOA, in all their infinite wisdom, had decided that my private driveway, where I parked my car, shoveled snow, and even grilled a few burgers when I felt like breaking the rules, was now open for all the residents of Maplewood Estates to use. Why? A decades-old zoning technicality buried in some obscure rulebook. I'd always suspected the HOA had a bit of a power trip problem, but this was next level. My mind raced between anger and disbelief as I marched across my driveway, now a public hotspot, to track down the mastermind behind this insanity. That mastermind had a name. Karen McAllister, HOA president and self-proclaimed queen of our suburban kingdom. I spotted her standing by the community mailbox, clipboard in hand, issuing warnings to some poor neighbor whose lawn was allegedly half an inch too tall. I didn't waste any time. Karen, what the hell is this? I waved the letter at her. She turned slowly, the kind of slow motion that power-hungry people use when they want you to feel insignificant. Oh, Jack, you got the notice. Her smile was as fake as the plastic flamingos she once tried to ban from front yards. Yeah, I got it. What I don't get is why you think you can just take my driveway. Karen's face barely changed. It's not your driveway anymore. It's part of the community now. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Oh, well, in that case, I'll start using your front porch as my personal breakfast nook. You'd like that, wouldn't you? She didn't flinch. No need to be dramatic. The decision was made after careful review of the HOA regulations. Technically, because your driveway is connected to the neighborhood walking path, it qualifies as shared space under the revised zoning rules. Revised by who? The ghosts of tyrants past. Karen ignored my jab and tapped her clipboard. It's all official. Residents are free to walk, gather, or utilize the area as they see fit, within HOA guidelines, of course. I felt my blood pressure rise. So let me get this straight. I have to let strangers just hang out in my driveway now? What's next? A community barbecue on my porch. She smirked, her eyes glinting with a touch of malice. Oh, don't be silly, Jack. Your porch is still private property. For now. I stood there, jaw clenched, as she walked off to ruin someone else's morning. My mind was racing so fast, I almost expected smoke to start pouring out of my ears. If the HOA wanted to play dirty, then I was more than ready to play dirtier. That evening, after simmering in righteous anger all day, I called Danny, my best friend since college. Danny was the kind of guy who could build a house with nothing but a butter knife and some duct tape, if you asked him nicely. Tell me why you sound like a guy who just found out his house was built on cursed land, Danny said as soon as he picked up. The HOA stole my driveway, I blurted. There was a pause. Oh, what? I explained everything, from the ridiculous letter to Karen's smug little speech about community property. Danny whistled. Man, they really hate you. The feeling's mutual. So what's the plan? We going full chaos mode, or are we taking the legal route? That was the million-dollar question. Normally, I'd lawyer up, file complaints, and go through the whole bureaucratic dance. But this wasn't just any fight. It was personal. I'm thinking we lean into it, I said, pacing my living room. Danny laughed. Oh, I like where this is going. If my driveway is community property now, then I'm going to make sure the whole community gets some use out of it. There was a beat of silence before Danny burst out laughing. Oh man, we're going to have some fun with this. The next morning, we got to work. The first step was gathering supplies: plywood, metal rails, concrete mix, and as many secondhand skatepark pieces as we could find on Craigslist. I'd skated a little when I was younger, not professionally, but enough to appreciate the beauty of a well-placed ramp. And one thing I knew for sure: nothing gets under the skin of an uptight HOA quite like a skate park in the middle of their pristine, rule-obsessed neighborhood. By mid-afternoon, the transformation had begun. The first mini-ramp was up, and a few curious neighborhood kids had gathered, watching us work with the kind of excitement usually reserved for Christmas morning. One of them, a kid named Mikey, pointed at the ramp. Are we allowed to skate on this? I grinned. It's community property, isn't it? Within an hour, word had spread. More kids arrived, skateboards and scooters in hand, eager to test out what was quickly becoming the coolest thing to ever happen in Maplewood Estates. Parents started showing up, some amused, others filming on their phones, all whispering about how Jack might actually be a genius. Then, like a storm cloud on a sunny day, Karen showed up. She stomped up the driveway, eyes darting from the ramps to the growing crowd of happy kids, looking absolutely scandalized. "Jack, what is this?" I wiped my hands on my jeans and smiled. "It's a community skate park. Pretty cool, huh?" Her face turned an alarming shade of red. "You can't just build a skate park on your driveway." "Oh, but I can," I said, crossing my arms. "It's community property now, remember?" She sputtered for a moment, but I could see the realization dawning on her. She had backed herself into a corner and knew it. This is outrageous," she finally managed. "The HOA will have a meeting about this." "Great," I said cheerfully. "While you do that, I think Mikey here is about to land his first kickflip. Let's give him some space." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a malfunctioning robot before she spun on her heel and stormed off, probably to write an emergency HOA memo filled with capital letters and passive-aggressive exclamation points. Danny slapped a hand on my shoulder. "Dude, this is the best idea you've ever had." I nodded, watching as a group of kids cheered Mikey on. Karen could try all she wanted to shut this down, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She had given me an opening, and now I was going to make sure she regretted it. The morning after the first unofficial skate session, I stepped outside with my coffee to find something unexpected. My driveway-turned skate park had been transformed overnight. The kids must have been busy, because someone had spray-painted Jack's Skate Haven on the side of the ramp, and a makeshift grind rail, probably stolen from a forgotten playground, had mysteriously appeared near the curb. Parents who had been skeptical the day before were now standing around, sipping their own coffees, watching as their kids had the time of their lives. Danny pulled up in his old truck, whistling as he took in the growing spectacle. "Man, this is catching on faster than I thought. You've got yourself a full-blown revolution happening." I smirked. People love sticking it to the HOA. Turns out all it took was a couple of ramps and some plywood. Danny hopped out of the truck, tossing me a bag of screws. Good news. Scored some more materials from a guy who used to run a skate shop. Bad news. Karen's probably on her way to personally set this place on fire. As if on cue, a familiar silver SUV came screeching around the corner. Karen McAllister slammed on her brakes, threw the door open, and stormed up my driveway like she was leading an army into battle. Her face had gone from its usual resting scowl to full-blown nuclear rage. "Jack, enough is enough," she snapped, jabbing a perfectly manicured finger at me. "This nonsense has to stop immediately." I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. Which nonsense are we talking about exactly? The fun? The happy kids? The thriving community spirit? She practically growled. "The illegal skate park you've built in direct violation of HOA policies." I tilted my head. "But Karen, you said this is community property now. You can't enforce private property rules on community space, can you?" Her eye twitched, and for a brief moment, I thought she might actually explode right there in my driveway. Instead, she yanked out her phone and started snapping photos. "Oh, just you wait," she hissed. "I've already called an emergency HOA meeting to address this. You won't get away with this, Jack." Danny leaned against the truck, arms crossed. "By address this, you mean the HOA is going to throw a fit in a room and write angry emails?" Karen ignored him and stormed back to her SUV, tires screeching as she peeled out of the neighborhood. The moment she was gone, the kids erupted in cheer. Danny laughed. "I give it 2 hours before the first official HOA complaint lands in your inbox." I shrugged. "Let them complain. We're just getting started." By noon, reinforcements had arrived. More parents, more kids, and even a few teenagers with serious skating skills. One guy, a college student named Kyle, had apparently competed in local competitions and was thrilled to have a new place to practice. He even offered to help teach some of the younger kids, which immediately won over the parents who had been skeptical. Then came the unexpected additions. A group of dads, clearly embracing their inner 12-year-olds, showed up with tools and a plan. They built a new rail, extended the quarter pipe, and even installed a small ledge for tricks. One dad, who I later found out used to be a contractor, started talking about getting some real concrete poured to make a proper bowl. This wasn't just my battle anymore. The entire community was rallying against the HOA's ridiculous rules. And that's when I knew. This was bigger than just annoying Karen. This was about proving that the neighborhood didn't need to be run by outdated, power-hungry bureaucrats who cared more about uniform mailbox colors than actual people. But just as we were celebrating our progress, the first real attack came. I was screwing in a final piece of plywood when a black town car pulled up in front of my house. Out stepped a tall, thin man in a suit. So stiff it looked like he'd been born in it. He adjusted his tie, glanced at the skate park with visible disgust, and marched straight toward me. "Mr. Reynolds," he said smoothly, extending a hand he clearly had no intention of actually shaking. "I'm Jonathan Pierce, legal counsel for the Maplewood Estates HOA." I wiped my hands on my jeans and gave him my best innocent smile. "Well, Jonathan, what brings you to my driveway? Or, as I've recently been informed, community property." His lips pressed into a thin line. "I've been asked to inform you that you are in direct violation of HOA regulations and that failure to cease and remove these modifications will result in legal action." I crossed my arms. "That's interesting because I was under the impression that, according to your own zoning loophole, this driveway belongs to the community now." He cleared his throat, clearly not enjoying being outmaneuvered. "That is a misinterpretation of the bylaws." Danny, who had been listening from the truck, snorted. "Sounds like someone's realizing they screwed up." Pierce ignored him. "If you do not remove these structures within 24 hours, the HOA will pursue an injunction." I pretended to think it over. "And what happens if I ignore that?" His nostrils flared slightly. "Then we will fine you." "Can't fine someone for modifying community space," I shot back. "It'd be like fining someone for putting up a basketball hoop in a public park." Pierce took a deep breath, clearly regretting every life decision that had led him to this moment. "Look, Mr. Reynolds, let's be reasonable." Now we were getting somewhere. "I'm listening." He hesitated, clearly hating every second of this. "If you agree to remove the ramps, we can explore revising the zoning classification of your driveway." I laughed. "So let me get this straight. You want me to destroy a place that the entire neighborhood loves, just so you can maybe consider giving me back what was already mine?" Pierce exhaled sharply. "It's the best offer you're going to get." I looked around. Parents were watching. Kids were skating. Neighbors were chatting happily. This was a community now. A real one. And there was no way I was going to let the HOA crush that. I smiled. "Pass." Pierce's expression darkened. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said. "You made a mistake when you thought I'd just roll over." He adjusted his tie, turned on his heel, and walked back to his car without another word. The moment he was gone, Danny let out a low whistle. "You know that guy's going to come back with something worse, right?" I nodded. "Yep. So what's the move?" I looked around at the people who had come together because of this place. The answer was obvious. We go bigger. The next morning, the skate park wasn't just a neighborhood attraction. It had become a full-blown movement. Kids, teenagers, and even a handful of surprisingly coordinated dads were practicing tricks, laughing, and enjoying the kind of community spirit that the HOA had never managed to create with all their rules. The energy was contagious. People who had barely spoken to each other before were now bonding over ollies and kickflips. But as much as I wanted to bask in the victory, I knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The HOA wasn't going to let this slide, and sure enough, right on schedule, the next attack came. I was in my garage, tightening some bolts on a new ramp when I heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. I stepped out just in time to see Karen, dressed in what I could only describe as her battle mode outfit. A blazer that screamed corporate villain and heels that looked capable of crushing dreams, storming toward me with a folder in hand. Behind her, a few other HOA board members hovered, looking equally displeased. She didn't waste any time. "Jack, you have officially crossed the line." I set my wrench down and crossed my arms. "I crossed the line? That's funny. I thought the line moved when you decided my driveway was public property." She slapped the folder against my chest. "This is an official cease and desist order. The HOA has filed a legal complaint, and if you don't remove this so-called skate park immediately, you will be fined $500 per day." I opened the folder and flipped through the papers. It was exactly what I expected. Legal jargon meant to intimidate me into backing down. I smirked, looking up at Karen. $500 a day, huh? Seems excessive for a piece of property that isn't even mine anymore." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't play dumb, Jack. We both know this was never about the driveway. This is about you undermining the HOA's authority. So you admit this isn't actually a rule violation? I asked, tilting my head. She clenched her jaw. It is now. That was all I needed to hear. I'd been waiting for this moment, for her to slip up and admit what this was really about. And I'd come prepared. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through my emails, and opened an attachment. See, Karen, I did a little digging last night. Turns out, Maplewood Estates' HOA regulations haven't been officially updated in years. And according to the original bylaws, the ones that still legally override any amendments you try to sneak in, community spaces require a unanimous vote before any major changes can be enforced. Karen's expression froze. I continued, which means your little zoning loophole, the one you used to take my driveway, that only works if every resident agrees to it. And shocker, they don't. One of the HOA board members, a guy named Tom, frowned and adjusted his glasses. Karen, is this true? She glared at me, clearly seething, but she didn't deny it. That was enough for Tom, who immediately pulled out his phone, probably to check the bylaws himself. The other board members started whispering among themselves, casting uneasy glances at Karen. I went in for the final blow. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to call an HOA meeting. Not one of those secret little gatherings where you and your friends change the rules behind everyone's backs. A real meeting where the whole neighborhood gets to vote. And if the majority agrees with me, you're going to back off. Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. You think you can just demand a vote? I don't need to demand it. I already got the signatures. I pulled out another piece of paper, a petition I had started circulating the moment I knew this fight was going to escalate. Dozens of signatures filled the page, and I knew more were coming. Karen snatched it from my hands and scanned the names, her lips tightening with every line she read. She looked up at me, eyes blazing. You think you've won? I shrugged. I think you're about to find out. The emergency meeting was scheduled for that evening. Word spread fast, and by the time I arrived at the HOA clubhouse, it was packed. Homeowners who had never bothered to attend before suddenly had a vested interest in what was going down. Some were there for the skate park, others just wanted to see Karen finally get what was coming to her. Either way, the air was buzzing with anticipation. Karen tried to keep the meeting under control, but she was drowning from the start. People were asking questions she didn't have answers for, calling her out on past decisions, and generally treating this less like a formal HOA discussion and more like a full-scale mutiny. When the topic of my driveway came up, I stepped forward. All I wanted was to be left alone. I didn't pick this fight. The HOA made it personal. But instead of backing down, I decided to turn something bad into something good. And you know what? The community actually came together for once. I think that says more about what this neighborhood really wants than any rulebook ever could. A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. A few people even clapped. Karen, sensing she was losing control, tried to interject. This is about following the rules. If we let this slide, what's next? Someone building a roller coaster in their backyard. Someone in the back shouted, "That actually sounds awesome." Laughter rippled through the room. Karen looked like she wanted to scream. Tom cleared his throat. It's clear the neighborhood has spoken. Let's put it to a vote. When the ballots were counted, it wasn't even close. The majority ruled in my favor. The HOA would officially rescind their claim over my driveway, and Karen was facing calls for removal as HOA president. She stormed out before the meeting even ended, her reign of terror collapsing in real time. By the next morning, the skate park was still standing, and the neighborhood felt different. Lighter. People smiled more, chatted more. The invisible walls that had been built by years of HOA nonsense were finally crumbling. I stood at the top of the halfpipe, watching as kids practiced tricks, parents watched from lawn chairs, and even a few new faces showed up, drawn in by the buzz. Danny skated up next to me, grinning. So, he said, what's next? I thought about it for a second. I was thinking we could add a few more ramps. Danny laughed. Man, I love this place. I smiled, watching as a kid nailed his first trick, and the crowd erupted in cheers. So did I.